In this video, I'm going to provide you with a complete guide to the Insta360 X4. This video will be organized in 4 basic parts. In the first part, I'm going to give you a tour of this camera, and I'm going to show you what each and every part on this camera is. That's important in order to use this camera to its maximum potential. Next, I'm going to go through the settings for each and every mode in this camera, and I'm going to give you the settings that I recommend to get the best possible footage from the X4. In the third part of this video, I'm going to go over a few filming tips and best practices that are really important to know when using the X4. And finally, in part 4, I'm going to show you some of the basic editing and reframing functions that you need to know when using the Insta360 app on your mobile device or the Insta360 Studio on your computer. By the time you're finished with this video, you're going to be well equipped to get some incredible footage with your X4. So first, let's take a look at the Insta360 X4 camera body. So first of all, up here on the top of the Insta360 X4, you have the lens. There's one of these on each side. You've got one lens here, and you've got the other lens right over here. This camera has 2 lenses, and these lenses allow the camera to capture a full 360-degree output. Now, it is important to not impact or scratch these lenses, and to keep the lens very clean at all times while you're filming. Any scratches or dirt on these lenses will impact image quality. And when not using the camera, I recommend always keeping it in the protective pouch that came with the camera, or if you want to use one of these lens covers like I have right here. It's a nice rubber piece, it's easy to slide on and off, and it does a good job protecting the lens. And of course, before filming, I recommend using the lens cloth that came with your Insta360 X4, just to make sure both lenses are nice and clean. So let's start with the left side of the camera right here. The first door on this side of the camera, to the left of the touchscreen, is the USB-C door. To open it, you just pop up right there, and it opens right here. This is where you will plug in the camera to charge it, or if you need to copy files off it via USB-C to a computer, that's where you would do it right there. When closing the door back up, do make sure there's no red showing. If I do that, you can see the little bit of red down there at the bottom if I don't close it all the way. You don't want any of that red showing, as that red will mean your X4 is not fully waterproof. And it means the door could pop open on you at any time. So make sure it clicks into place. It does make a nice audible click when you shut it. Below the USB-C door, we have the battery bay. In order to open the battery, all you have to do is take the top latch and the bottom latch and squeeze them together. And the battery is going to pop out pretty easily, just like that. This has a couple connectors here. And if you look closely inside here, you can see where it connects down there at the bottom. And inside the battery bay is also where you'll find your micro SD card slot. So if you look closely, you can see the micro SD card right down here. And in order to remove the card, you just have to push on it. It'll pop right out. And anytime you're inserting the card, you just want to make sure the text on the card is facing toward your screen right here. And in order to insert it, you're just going to line it up with the slot. You're going to push in. When you get it in place, you're going to hear a little click. It's going to latch nicely right there. And this is a good time to mention this. If you didn't buy your micro SD card from Insta360 and you're wondering which card to get, make sure you get a micro SD card with at least UHS 1 V30 speeds. And the X4 does support micro SD cards up to 1 terabyte in size. Now in the X4 currently, I'm using the SanDisk Extreme Pro micro SD card, and this is a bit overkill. The X4 doesn't require the read and write speeds that this card is capable of, so if you do have a SanDisk Extreme, this will also work in there. I do prefer the SanDisk brand of micro SD cards. I've used them for many, many years and not had any problems, but there are other good brands out there as well. In order to put the battery back into the camera, make sure this part of the battery right here is at the bottom, and you're just going to line it up. You're going to click it into place. Just make sure there's no red showing here or here, and that's how you'll know you've got the battery in securely. Going over to the right side of the touchscreen, the top button is the power button. Power button is right here, and when you push this button, it'll power on the camera. When your camera's on, this light down here at the bottom is going to be blue, and when you're recording, it will be red and flashing, which the record button is right here. We'll get to that in a moment, but just to demonstrate, that's what it'll look like when you're recording. It'll be red and flashing at the bottom. The button here below the power button is the Q button, and Q in this case represents quick. This quick button allows you to have quick access to presets. And there are already some pre-configured presets on here, but you can edit or add additional presets if you want to. So when you push the Q button, what it's going to do, it's going to bring up the presets right here. Right now there's motorcycling, skiing, outdoors. Then there's also this plus button where you can add your own presets. We'll get into that a little bit later. And down at the bottom here, below the touchscreen, you have the shutter button. So this is the button I just showed you the recording with. If you press it, it'll start recording. If you press it again, it will stop recording. And when you're recording, it's going to show red. The light's going to be blinking red. And when you're not recording, it's going to be the default status light of blue that indicates the camera is powered on. And then the other button over here on the bottom is the menu button. If you press the menu button once, this is where you can toggle through 360 and single lens mode up here at the top. In addition, if you press this, you can toggle through all of the different modes on here. And these are the modes I'm going to show you all the best settings for in just a little bit. Finally, the screen here on the camera is the touchscreen. And this is a 2.5-inch touchscreen on the X4. On the X3, we had a 2.29-inch touchscreen. So this screen is a little bit bigger, and it is noticeable. It does make it easier to toggle and to set settings on there, which I really appreciate. Good design improvement by Insta360. And on this screen, there are various icons, and I want to go through what each of those are so that you have a good understanding of those. So first of all, up here in the upper left, this is the micro SD card status. And that status there is going to generally give you a duration. So this means we could record 8K 30 frames per second for 3 hours and 42 minutes before we would fill up the remaining space on the card. If we were to switch modes here, let's say go to photo. In photo, it's going to give you a count of how many photos you could take. So in this case, it can be 9,999 plus. We could fit a bunch of photos on here because we have a ton of space. The next icon at the top will be the preset mode. And I'm going to set it to one of those modes so you can see it. It's going to be this icon right up here. Right now that icon shows a ski symbol because I'm in the ski preset. But if you don't have a preset set, it's going to have no symbol there. The next symbol is dive case mode. So if you have the camera in dive case mode, that's going to be white and not gray. I, of course, don't have it in dive case mode right now because I'm not underwater. But if you did, that's where you're going to see that. And you, of course, want to make sure you're only in dive case mode when you're using the dive case. The next symbol is the AirPod symbol. Now, you won't see that here right now because my DJI Mic 2 is not currently connected to the camera. But if it was connected, you would see the symbol right up there just to the left of the battery. And of course, if you have AirPods, a DJI mic, or another supported wireless mic paired via Bluetooth, it's going to show there in white to let you know you have it connected. The final icon at the top is the battery status. And right now we have a good bit of charge, probably 89 to 90% there. It's mostly white, which means it's mostly full still. Next, going down to the bottom, we have the shooting mode symbol right here. Right now it's in video mode, so it's going to show the video mode symbol. And next to the shooting mode symbol are the parameters. Right now we're in 8K 30 frames per second, and that shows right there. And down here we have the switch lens symbol with the two arrows that kind of go in a circle there in the lower right. That's going to mainly apply if you're in single lens mode, but if you'd prefer to be able to see yourself, you can do that, and you'll be able to see yourself on the camera when you're filming, even if you're in 360. And of course, you can drag this around and you can frame your perspective however you desire to do so. But I'm going to put it back to the default. But if you are in single lens mode, this will be important because whatever you see here is what you're going to be filming in single lens mode. So if you want to be filming yourself, you want to make sure it's facing toward you because that's going to be what the camera's capturing. And depending on what mode you're in, you're also going to see the field of view option right here. Right now I'm in Mega, and I highly recommend Mega View. I'll talk about that a little bit later and why. But in this particular video mode, you have Mega, Ultra, and D-Warp as options. And there is another icon you'll see down here at the bottom, and it's going to be related to low light mode. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put my lens cap on to get that to trigger. All right, so see when I put that on, see this icon right here? It's because the camera automatically detected you were in lower lighting. And of course I am because I have the lens entirely covered. But it's going to give you the option to switch to 5.7K because when lighting conditions are dim, that 5.7K is going to produce a brighter image. If you see this symbol pop up, I do recommend switching to the 5.7K. And we'll talk about that a little bit later as well. And finally, on the right side near the top, you're going to see all of these more advanced shooting parameter symbols. And in order to adjust those, you just swipe in from the right, and you can change all of the settings down here at the bottom. Speaking of swiping down on the screen is going to take you to the main menu options. So if you swipe down, you're going to get to those. And there is an additional sub-menu here on the second page, and we're going to go through those settings in a moment. And swiping up on the screen is going to take you to the basic parameter settings. So this is where you can adjust your resolution and your frame rate. Swiping from right to left is going to take you to those advanced settings that I just showed you. And then swiping left to right is going to take you to any footage that you've recorded. And you're going to be able to toggle through it here, and you can see all of that on here. In the next section of the video, I'm going to take you through all the best settings for each and every mode and which settings I recommend in order to get the very best footage from the Insta360 X4. And first, before we get into any of the specific modes, I want to show you some key settings on the main menu to make sure that those are set, because some of these key settings are going to really affect the quality and look of your footage. Now, we're not going to go into all of these because a lot of these defaults are great as they are. This one in the upper left, make sure that's selected. That just is your rotation lock, and it helps your footage not to rotate in the camera as you rotate it. It's mostly a visual thing for you to be able to see it, but I recommend that because it makes it a lot easier to keep track of what your framing is. If you want to do voice commands, make sure this is turned on. And if you want to do gestures, make sure that's on as well. The rest of these settings I'm leaving alone on this page, not changing anything else. On the second page for this one, I like to make sure the indicator light is on down here. That helps me to know if my camera's on or if it's recording, so I recommend keeping that on. For the built-in audio, I recommend using auto wind noise reduction. I find that gives the best overall results. And of course, if you are going to use a wireless mic, right here is where you would pair it to that. I'm not going to pair mine right now, but that's where you would pair it. And just make sure your mic is in Bluetooth mode when you do, and it will find it and it will pair. Most of the key settings we're going to want to change are going to be down here underneath this cog. So if we click on that, for the screen auto sleep and auto power off, I like having those both set to 3 minutes. You of course can change them to a host of settings, including never, but I like them set to 3 in case I left the camera on too long. That way it's not going to drain my battery more quickly than I want it to. Image settings is really important. Let's click on that. First of all, you want to make sure your video encoding is set to H.265. It's going to give you the best quality with also the best file size. Bitrate, very important. Make sure it's set to high. High is going to give you the very best quality footage. If it's set to standard, you're not going to have as high of a bitrate, and your footage is not going to look as good. For video sharpness, this is really a preference for you, but I recommend keeping this set to low. Video that's too sharp just does not look good. And if you're not going to do any editing later on, and let's say you're not in an environment like this where there's a lot of trees, you could get away with medium there and have it still look good. But I definitely do not recommend ever using high. And medium, I don't like to use either. If I need to add a little sharpness later on, I like to do it when editing. I do find that the low produces the best looking footage, in my opinion. So I'm going to keep that set to low. For the anti-flicker, usually auto is going to be fine. So those are the settings you want to change in the main menu. And the other thing I recommend making sure of is make sure your X4 is on the latest firmware before you key in any of these settings, because you may see some settings that don't exist on yours if you're not on the latest firmware. And the firmware update's really easy to do. You just have to pair your X4 with the Insta360 app on your phone, and it's going to automatically check if you have a firmware update available. If you do, it's going to push it wirelessly from your phone directly to your X4, and it's going to take you through the steps to install it. Firmware is important because not only is it going to have the latest and greatest features, but it's also going to have any bug fixes that are available for the X4. All right, so the first mode we're going to talk about here is the video mode. And if you're like me, I'm guessing video is probably going to be what you're doing the bulk of your filming with this camera. So in general, for filming good video, I recommend using 8K 30, 25, or 24 as much as possible. And this is because that 8K is ultimately going to give you the very best looking reframe footage. It's going to have the highest resolution, and it's going to look really good. Now, as far as which is better between 24 and 30, there's not really a lot of difference. 24 is more of that classic cinematic look, and 30 is more of that television show look. However, if you want any motion blur in your footage, you can add this later on when reframing. There's an effect called Motion ND, which is really incredible, and I'm excited to show you that in a little bit when we get to the reframing section. But basically, you don't need to have ND filters for this camera because you can add that later on. And if you do want to do any slow motion, I recommend using 5.7K 60. 5.7K 60 is going to allow you to slow it down to 50% of the original speed if you're on a 30 frames per second timeline, or 40% of the original speed if you're on a 24 frames per second timeline. Now, if you want some really slow motion, you can also do 4K 100 frames per second, which will allow you to slow it down to about 25% of the original speed. But I don't recommend using this mode unless you really have a need for that slow motion, because 4K 100 is not going to be nearly as good a quality when you reframe later on, and it's going to be noticeable when you reframe and export. So for slow motion, most of the time I recommend 5.7K 60, like I said, unless you need it slower. But we're going to go back here to 8K 24. That is my main mode that I use. And after setting that, let's talk about the lens right here. I do recommend Mega View. Mega View is great because it's nice and wide, but Mega View also helps reduce that vertical distortion. So I kind of view it as having the best of both worlds. If you want a little bit narrower field of view, you could use Ultra or D-Warp, but there's really not a reason to do that because later on, since this is 360 footage, you get to choose how you frame it as well as your cropping when you're editing. So I don't really recommend using anything but Mega View here. It's going to give you the best. And let's get into the advanced parameters over here. First thing you can do is you can keep this all set to auto. You're still going to see the similar options. And in general, a lot of the auto settings are going to work well, but there are a few that I recommend adjusting. So the first one here, this is going to be your color profile, and you have standard, vivid, or flat to work with. Now, if you want to do any color grading later on, I recommend sticking with flat. I like flat. It gives you a little bit flatter image that you can kind of adjust the contrast and the colors. You can fine tune them the way you would like. If you're not going to do any color grading at all later on, I recommend sticking with standard. Vivid, I don't really recommend in general because I find the saturation is just a little bit too high for my liking. But if you want a really saturated look to your footage, Vivid is what you would want to go with. For the EV value, I do recommend setting this a little bit lower than 0. I like to stick with negative 0.3. I find that that helps protect my highlights, especially with clouds. It makes sure that that doesn't get blown out. Sometimes the default exposure of 0, the highlights can get a little bit blown out. So I like to do negative 0.3, gives me that little bit of buffer there. There is also a mode here called low light stabilization. If you are working in low light, I recommend turning that on. But if you're not in low light, I recommend keeping it off. For the white balance, I do recommend setting this to a static value. Most of the time, I'm going to be filming in normal daylight hours, like right now. I like to keep it at 5500K. That best mimics the natural white balance. But if you are filming around sunrise or sunset, then I recommend putting this to 6500K. And if you're filming in the evening or nighttime, I recommend doing 4000K. But my default here is 5500K. And by the way, just make sure you click the M in order to adjust that first. If you have it on auto, the auto goes to 5500K automatically, but you want to click M so you can set that static value, and so it'll stay there. And finally, over here on the right, there's a value that is for the balanced exposure. This is going to balance it for all of the 360 degrees. So it's going to take an average of your entire frame and balance it. I recommend just keeping this to auto. Auto in general is going to be what you want there. And then down here, if you want to really fine tune these parameters, which I like to with a couple of these, you're going to want to click M. And what we want to do first of all for the shutter, I like to keep that set to auto. So we're going to set the shutter back to auto, and it's going to re-expose it properly there. And then for the ISO, I like to click auto, but then I like to set 800 max. I like to do 800 max here because I don't want it to boost the ISO higher than 800 max. It's going to start to get pretty grainy with the footage and it's not going to look good. Now, if you are doing any type of low light filming, you will want to put this back to auto because there will be situations where it will need to boost higher than 800 in the low lighting. But if you're filming in normal daylight like this, I recommend keeping it set to 800 max. And then we're just going to confirm the EV and white balance have stayed. So those are our settings right there for video. So while we're in video mode, I want to show you the single lens mode so we can get that set up as well. We're going to click on menu, select single lens up there. And then first of all, by default, you want to make sure you're in 4K here. And then for your frame rate, if you don't want to slow anything down later on, keep it at 24, 25, or 30. If you do want to slow the footage down later on, do 4K 60. In this mode, I generally like to film in 4K 60. That way, anything I do want to slow down later on, I have it there later on. And I can always drop that 60 frames per second footage onto a 30 or 24 frames per second timeline. It'll do fine on that. And then for the lens view, this is going to depend on what you're doing with that filming. So you've got action, ultra, or D-Warp. I usually just stick with middle of the road ultra here. I find I like that best. And you have to remember with this footage, you're not able to reframe it later on because it is single mode. So what you see here is what you get. But if you are going to have a lot of humans in it or a lot of buildings and you don't want that Boeing fisheye effect, then I recommend doing D-Warp for the lens. And like I said earlier, make sure you've put this to the direction you want to be filming in. So if I want to film myself here, I want to make sure this lens is being used, this lens right here. And then if I'm not going to be filming myself, I want to utilize the lens on this side of the camera. As far as the advanced parameters here, this is going to be the same deal as the other. So I'm going to plug these in the way I want them. And I recommend all of the same settings for this. So I won't go into any great depth with that. However, there is one setting here that's a little bit different, and that is called face priority. So if you want it to prioritize the exposure for your face, which I do recommend if you're going to be vlogging with it, you want to select face priority. Otherwise, you want to do matrix, which will just ensure accurate exposure of the whole image. But I'm going to leave this at face priority. And then night mode, same thing. If you're going to be in low light, make sure that's set to on for better stabilization. If you're not, you can leave it off. And then white balance, I'm going to set that to 5500K. And there are a couple other modes under here. Me mode, I would recommend doing the same thing there. But you can only go up to 4K 30 in me mode. Usually I just keep me mode at 4K 24. And with me mode, the advanced parameters, I'm not going to go through those again since we already have. But I recommend the same settings for that as well. And for the lens, I do recommend max for me mode. I find that gives the best results. And with the lens view, that's really going to depend on what you're filming. If you do max, it's going to be the very widest angle. It says here it recommends this for shooting open landscapes, such as canyons and grass. I often find that ultra is my favorite here. It's kind of a good balance. And of course, dewarp, if you're going to have a lot of humans or buildings or other things where you want the straight lines, you'll want to make sure to select that. But I usually stick with ultra as my default. And then you also have free frame video. And what free frame is, free frame allows you to apply some of that horizon lock and stabilization later on when editing. And you can unlock some pretty wide angles here. This is 170 degrees in this mode, which is very wide. But you are a little bit limited with the resolution and frame rate here as well. I do recommend 4K 24 for that. And I do recommend keeping horizon lock on. And then for the advanced parameters, again, I recommend the same thing here for all of those settings, so I won't go through those again. And then, of course, you do have single photo mode, where if you want to take a photo with a single lens, you can. I recommend doing the 360-degree mode. But if you are going to take a photo here, I recommend having 36 megapixels for the resolution. It's going to give the highest, best resolution. And then for these parameters over here, I recommend keeping it set to pure shot plus raw. That way you'll get the pure shot photo, but you'll also have the raw one later on if you want to do any editing of the raw photo. And then for the EV comp, I do recommend the negative 0.3 so that you don't have an overexposed photo. And face priority, I definitely recommend there. And white balance, I recommend auto. It's going to do a good job with the white balance. It is just a static photo. It's not several video clips. So I recommend leaving white balance at auto. Those are all the modes under single lens. So we're going to go back here to 360 again. And I did want to quickly show you what I recommend for the best low light settings here. So for low light, you want to go to 5.7K, and then you want to do 24, 25, or 30. Those are going to give you the best low light footage. And I do recommend saving this as a preset for low light. So what you can do is you can hit the Q button and go over here and hit the plus sign. And then for this one, you can pick one of these options, or you can do customize. So I'm going to do customize here, and I'm going to have it keep all of my settings here. But for the image parameters, I do want to boost this to 1600 max. And then for the EV comp for this mode, I want to put it back to 0. And low lighting, 0 is generally going to give the best results. And for white balance, we're going to put that to 4000K for low lighting. Once I'm done with that, I'm going to click add preset. So right there, we have the customize there. And then we're going to be able to toggle that later on. And of course, these other presets, motorcycling, skiing, and outdoors, you can click down here where it's the pencil, and you can edit any of these parameters to have them match up to what you want. If we switch between these and let's say go to outdoors, it's going to show the outdoors symbol up there. So that symbol is really nice for you to know when you're in a preset. And if you want to exit a preset, just click down here on the menu button and just click on video again, and it's going to go back to the default there. All right, let's go to our next mode. Next mode is going to be active HDR for video. So for active HDR, it does have its benefits, but unfortunately 5.7K is not going to be the highest resolution possible from this camera. So I really don't recommend using the HDR mode unless you have a specific use case for it. But if you are going to use it, I recommend doing the Mega View. That's going to make it best for reframing later on. And as far as advanced parameters, all you have there is the white balance to adjust. There aren't any other parameters that you can adjust with the HDR mode. For next mode, it's going to be time-lapse mode. Now, the incredible thing about time-lapse mode on here is you can do 11K, and I definitely recommend taking advantage of that 11K. Now, if you're going to be doing a daytime time-lapse like today with clouds or sunset time-lapse, I recommend 2 seconds or 5 seconds for the interval. Both are good. If you are going to do a time-lapse that's really long and just like all day long, then you might want to do 10 seconds or 30 seconds And of course, if you're doing a multi-day time lapse with this plugged in, then you can get all the way up to 120 seconds, which means it'll do one frame every 2 minutes. But I generally use this for quicker time lapses, so I usually keep it to 2 seconds. That way I have the most frames possible to work with later on. And for the view, I recommend using the Mega View. There's really not a reason not to use the Mega View for time lapses. And then if we scroll in from the right, this is going to be similar to the video mode. So I'm not going to go through all these settings again, but these are the settings that I use for this because I like to grade those later on. So I keep it flat. But if you don't want to color grade it, keep it set to standard. EV, I definitely recommend the -0.3, especially if a time lapse is going to involve clouds. You want to make sure you don't lose the detail in the highlights on the clouds. And for the white balance, I last did a sunset with this, but if you're doing during the daytime, put that to 5500K for best results. Let's go to our next mode. Next mode is TimeShift. So the exciting thing about TimeShift on the X4 is this is now in 8K, 30 frames per second. And I recommend using that. It's going to give you the very best, highest detailed footage. And then for the speed, I recommend keeping that auto. TimeShift does a really good job with selecting the correct speed and interval. For lens, I recommend using Mega there. And then for these settings, again, these are going to be really similar. I do use flat, and I use auto for the shutter, and I use 800 max for the ISO. I use -0.3 for the EV, and I use 5500K for the white balance. Next mode is bullet time. So bullet time, you need the bullet accessory, which I don't currently have my camera connected to. It's going to be where you swing your camera around, and that can be great for some unique slow motion perspectives, and it looks really cool. And bullet time, you can now do 5.7K 120 on here. I recommend doing the 5.7K 120. There's not a reason to use a lower resolution. And then for the individual parameters here, these are going to be the same again. Flat if you want to grade later on, standard if you just want it right out of the camera without any grading. An EV, I like to do -0.3, and white balance, 5500K if it's during the daytime. Next mode is loop recording. So loop recording mode allows you to set a loop duration. And after you record that specific duration, the earliest recorded content will be deleted and it will be continuously overwritten. For example, if you select a loop duration of 3 minutes here, and then you shoot for a total of 30 minutes, only the last 3 minutes of the shooting will be saved. Now, this can be great for those scenarios where you're waiting for something to happen, but you're not exactly sure when it's going to happen. So for instance, if you're at a sports game, or if you're watching a thunderstorm, you're waiting for lightning, and you have your camera filming, those are great opportunities to use this. And the camera storage isn't going to fill up while you wait for the moment. You'll only have the little bit at the end that you were waiting for. And then for the lens view, like with the other modes, I recommend Mega. And then for these settings, it's going to be same thing that I have for my other settings. Let's talk about the next mode, which is StarLapse. StarLapse is a really fun mode on this camera. You can get some really great results with that, and I definitely recommend playing around with it. So for the resolution, you have one option, 18 megapixels. For the duration, I recommend sticking with infinity. That way you can start and stop the camera when you want to. And for the timer, I recommend 3 seconds. What that means is after you hit record, it won't start the StarLapse until 3 seconds after you hit record, which is important because after you hit record, your camera may be moving a little. And for StarLapse, you want it completely still on a tripod. For the view, I recommend Mega View. That's going to give you the best results with StarLapse. And then for these parameters, it's going to depend on how dark your sky is. But for StarLapse in general, I recommend a shutter speed of 30 seconds if you're in a dark sky area, or if you're trying to get the stars at night in the sky. It's going to give the best results. And of course, it's completely white right now because that's way overexposed for the daytime. For the ISO, I generally set this to a static value of 800, but if it is a really dark night, you could go as high as 1600. But I find there's a lot of noise and grain in the footage if I go as high as 1600. So I find that 800 with 30 seconds for capturing stars tends to work best. For the white balance, I like to keep that set to 4000K. I find that works best with the night sky. But if you want it a little bit bluer, you can go down to 3200K. But if you want it more neutral, you want to stick with 4000K. Next mode is burst. And this is going to be for photos. So it's a burst photo mode. For resolution, I recommend 18 megapixels. Timer, I recommend 3 seconds, but you can set the timer longer if you need time to hit this and then get back. Like if you're doing a family photo, you could put this all the way up to 15 seconds. And then you press the shutter button here, and that gives you 15 seconds to get back in view of the camera. And then of course down here at the bottom is the burst duration. So the default is 15 in 1 second. I like to do 15 in 10 seconds if I'm taking photos of people. I find that works best. And then for lens view, I recommend Mega. It's going to give you the widest field of view. But if you do have a lot of people in it, you may want to do dewarp because there could be distortion, especially near the edges. But if you're doing a landscape, do Mega. And then for shooting parameters, I recommend keeping this set to Pure Shot. Pure Shot's going to give you the best looking photo straight out of the camera. EV, I recommend the negative 0.3. White balance, I recommend keeping that at auto for the photos. And then I recommend keeping the exposure set to auto as well. Next mode is interval. So the interval mode is one of those that I use if I want to do a very manual type of time lapse. And what I mean by that is if I want to get a time lapse where I have individual photos at a certain interval and they're really high res. And then if I want to edit those later on, say in Lightroom, and then put them all together in Premiere Pro, that's what I use interval photo for. Now you can use it for a purpose of just simply taking photos at whatever interval you set. Doesn't have to be for time lapse, but time lapse is going to be one of the common use cases. So for resolution, I definitely recommend 72 megapixels. Duration, I recommend infinity. And interval, it's really going to depend on what you're doing with it. But for me, in my use cases, let's say of a daytime time lapse, I'm going to keep it set to 3 seconds. You can also use this for a nighttime time lapse too. So in that case, if you're doing that, I would put it to 30 seconds. And then for the lens view, I recommend Mega, unless you're doing something where distortion would be a big issue. And then you could go down to dewarp here. Then for the individual parameters, for this, I recommend doing Pure Shot plus RAW, because the whole point of doing this mode is generally that you're going to want a RAW photo to edit later on. So I do recommend selecting Pure Shot plus RAW. For the EV comp, if it's during the daytime, I recommend negative 0.3 so that your highlights don't get blown out. For the white balance, you definitely want to set this to a static value. You want that to stay the same. So if you're doing it during the day, I recommend 5500K. If you're doing a nighttime one, then I recommend 4000K. And for the exposure, I recommend setting that to auto. Next mode is HDR Photo. Now, HDR Photo, I do recommend using sometimes if you want a good, simple HDR photo that also looks great right out of the camera. And if you are going to use that, definitely set it to 72 megapixels because that's going to give you the highest resolution. And for the lens mode, again, like the other modes, Mega if you're doing a landscape, but put it down to dewarp if you have buildings or people where you don't want any distortion. And then for the parameters, you really don't have many options. You have Pure Shot or Pure Shot. And for the white balance, I recommend keeping that set to auto. It's going to work best for a photo. Next mode is the standard photo mode here. And personally, I like to use this one a lot if I don't have any specialized use cases, if I just want to take a photo that I can then reframe later on. So I'm going to click down here. You want to make sure it's in 72 megapixels. For the lens view, I recommend Mega, unless distortion is potentially a big issue, in which case you'd want to use dewarp. For the settings down here, I do recommend Pure Shot plus RAW. And that's going to give you the Pure Shot photo that looks great straight out of the camera, but you're also going to get the ungraded RAW photo that you can edit later on if you want to. For the EV comp, I recommend doing negative 0.3. For the white balance, I recommend just keeping that set at auto. It's going to do a good job for you. And then for the exposure balance, I recommend keeping that at auto as well. And we are back to the video mode. We have gone through all the modes on here now. So now that we've gone through all of the best settings that I recommend on the X4 for every single mode, I know there was a lot of settings. I want to provide you with 3 basic tips that are going to help you film properly with this camera and get the best looking footage with your technique that you use. So tip number 1 is make sure you keep the X4 at least 2 feet away from any subject that you care about having reframe properly later on. And of course, if you're using the Insta360 selfie stick or the extended selfie stick like this one, keeping your camera 2 feet away is not a problem. That's easy enough to do. But the reason you want to keep it 2 feet away is there is a safety stitching distance for all 360-degree cameras. And this is because there's parallax between the 2 lenses. And it's not possible to stitch them properly with an object that's closer than 2 feet to the lenses. But as long as the camera is beyond the safety distance of 2 feet, the parallax will be eliminated and the footage will stitch properly. Tip number 2 is make sure you're aware of where the stitch line is going to be. So the stitch line on this camera is going to be right here. It's going to be between the 2 lenses. So the lens here is recording this way, and the lens on this side is recording that way. The stitch line is going to be right down the center and above where the 2 lenses meet. And the reason you need to be aware of the stitch line is you want to make sure the stitch line is not lining up with you or any subject in your footage that you're going to care about looking proper. And the reason for that is because the stitch line, even though it's a lot better on the X4, it's much better even than the X3. The improvement's incredible, and the AI stitching technology really helps with that. But still, with that stitch line, you can sometimes see where it is. It does line up on a human or certain trees, subjects like that. You can sometimes see it. So you just want to eliminate that risk by not ever having the stitch line line up with the subject you care about. And that's usually pretty easy to do. If you're filming yourself, just make sure one of the lenses is facing toward you. If you're filming someone else, make sure a lens is facing toward them. Just make sure the stitch line doesn't cross an object that matters to you in your filming. And finally, tip number 3 is try to keep your movements with the X4 as smooth as possible. Now, the full estate stabilization is really good on the X4, and it's not really a stabilization concern. The flow state is really smooth and better than ever. But still, if you're walking along and your camera's going like this as you're walking along, a little bit of that bounce is going to show in your footage. I have to be really careful with this while hiking. It's going to be one of those areas where I have to watch it closely. Doesn't mean you have to walk like you're on a tightrope. You don't have to be that careful, but do just be aware that you don't want to have the camera bouncing around a lot like this. You do want to try to walk smoothly with it and kind of glide with your camera as much as possible. It will make your footage look extra good later on. So for the final section of this video, let's talk about reframing and editing the footage that you film with your X4. There are 2 main ways to edit and reframe it. One is using the Insta360 app on your mobile device, and the other is using the Insta360 Studio on your computer. And what I'm going to show you is I'm going to show you the basics of how to import, edit, and export footage to get the best quality using the mobile app. In addition, I'm going to show you how to import, reframe, and export using the Studio app on a computer as well to get the best quality footage there as well. So the first thing you'll want to do is you'll want to power on your Insta360 X4. And next, you'll want to open your Insta360 app on your smartphone, and then you'll want to connect to your phone right down here. And of course, if you've already paired it for the firmware update, you should see it there. It may have to search a little bit, and then it's going to give you a connect button. So I'm going to click join here, and it's going to connect via Wi-Fi pretty quickly. All right, so we have a connection here, and I'm just going to tweak something in my settings. That hovering help button right there, I'm going to turn that off so it doesn't get in the way. So now that we've connected, the next thing we're going to want to do, if we want to get some footage to edit on the phone, we're going to go here to album. And if you go to all, and up here where it says camera, you've got options of all, downloaded, and camera. So right now with camera, it's going to show you everything that's on the camera here. So I've got a lot of samples that I filmed, and I'm just going to grab a couple here. And all you have to do to download it, just press down on it, and you can click download. And if you want to allow the automatic quick downloading, you just need to enable that location access, and it will do that. And as it downloads, this is background downloading, so technically you don't even have to keep the app open, which is really nice. I am going to keep it open in this case, and I'm going to select another file here to download. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to select a different one here. So I'm going to hold down on it, and I'm going to click download app. And these go very quickly. And while you're downloading it, a green light is going to show on your Insta360 X4. And that indicates there's a connection and your files are downloading. And if you want to select multiple files, you go up here where there's this check mark in the upper right, and you select that, and you can select all the files for a specific date if you want to. And it makes it really easy. So if you wanted to import all of them to edit on your phone or to put them together as part of a project, super easy to do that. And then you would just go down here to the second arrow over, and that's where you would click download. All right, so our 2 files that we want to edit, they are downloaded here now. I'm going to go here and I'm going to take a look at this. And when I click on it, it's going to start playing automatically. So what you can do to pause it is you can just click there. And if you click again anywhere on the screen, it's going to do play again. So up here at the top, you've got a couple different options. The AI edit option is if you want to let Insta360 software select the best edit. So you can do that, and it's going to download the analysis resources the first time. You won't have to do this any other time you select AI, unless there's an update to the app or something like that. But the first time you do it, it does have to download those AI resources. And usually it's a pretty quick download. It doesn't take too long. So if you click AI, click this right here at the bottom, and it's going to generate a couple draft clips, and you can kind of look through those and see which one you like. Gives you a bunch of different options, which is really cool. So you can choose the compilation right here, and it's going to show you what that looks like. And you can also do selfie view. So if you click on that, It's going to give you a couple of those. And forward view, you can click on that. So it's got a bunch of options. And then you go to giraffes. It's going to show you a bunch of different ones here. So this one right here would be one if I just wanted it to focus on me. And then in addition to that, you also can do the quick edit. And the quick edit here, one of the cool things, if you look as I move around my phone, I can look around in my scene. I can look up, I can look down. You don't have to drag anything on the screen. So if you want to, you can hit record, and this is going to go forward while you look around. And what it's going to do is your final clip is going to be recording what you're looking at. And that's going to be how the output is going to be reframed. So that is pretty cool. Sometimes I like to use this. I think it's very interesting to try it out. And of course, you can drag around with the joystick here as well on the screen while you're recording. And it's going to record exactly what you drag. So if you prefer to edit that way, that's one of the many options you can do. I'm going to click stop here. And also where you click 360 here, it's going to just do a spin around 360 view. Anytime you want to get back to that default view, just click the arrow right here. It's going to be the forward view. And selfie view, just click the one below it. It's going to take you to that. And this one right here, it's going to be if you want to select a subject and do tracking, you can start it recording there too. And it's going to track you or whatever you select as the subject. And then finally down here, this is a zoom. So if you want to zoom out, do that tiny earth effect, you would do that. And then if you want to zoom in, you can do that as well. So pretty cool function there. So I'm going to click delete and exit from that quick view. And then the third view here is the pro view. So pro is the one that I find myself using most often. And that's because I've got a lot of different options in here. I can do the trim. Trim is if I want to delete some of it. I can also change the view. So if I want to output it as a 16:9, I can do that right here. I don't have to just do the 9:16. So basically that means you could output a full 4K reframed 16:9 using your phone and upload it. There's of course another couple other options here, like the real cinematic 2:35 to 1. And then there's the 1:1 square as well. And then snapshot, if you want to do a picture, you can do that. Stats, you can import those if you have it connected there. Music, Insta360 has a whole collection of music that you can choose from to add to your clips. This is music where you're not going to have any legal takedowns, anything like that if you upload using it, which is very cool. So there's a whole bunch of options here. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I will mention one of my favorites here is Motion ND. And I'm actually going to bring up a different clip here where I'm riding a bike. So this clip right here is going to be a better one to show you some of the Motion ND effect on it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead a little bit and I'm going to add a keyframe right here. And I'm going to choose Mega View. So I want Mega View right there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to click this so it'll track me. And I'm going to let it track me here. And I won't do the entire clip, but I'm going to let it track me a little bit here so you can see what I mean with the Motion ND effect. The tracking capabilities are phenomenal. This is another one I use on here. If I want a subject tracked like myself riding a bike, just makes it super easy to do the cut and to get my final clip the way I want it. So I'm going to stop tracking, but I'm going to show you that Motion ND effect. So first I'm going to click play here. As you can see, it did a great job tracking me, but the ground there looks a little bit sharp in each frame. And I want to make it softer with a little more motion blur. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here. I'm going to click Motion ND and I'm going to keep the defaults there for now. I like how that looks. Look at that. After I apply it, look at the ground going by with the motion blur. It looks really good there. All right. And another effect I'll sometimes use is speed here. So if you have a clip that you filmed in 5.7K 60, you can do a slowdown here and you can apply that slow-mo. And you can see there, slow-mo applies really nicely. I'm going to put it back to the normal speed, but I just wanted to demonstrate that. And just to add a simple keyframe, you can add that right here and you can select how you want it framed. And then you can go ahead and let's say 5 seconds later, I wanted to turn the framing to face in front of me. You got another keyframe and you select your field of view, which I recommend Mega View. And then if you go back here and play this, you see the camera view, it's going to swing around. So there are lots and lots of advanced features in here. And what I like about this app is Insta360 offers it at no cost. Those features all come with the app. And if you want to adjust your colors, you can do Color Plus here. You can drag that to kind of add a little bit deeper, richer colors there. And there is Clarity Plus as well. You can turn that on. And as you can see there, that affects the clarity. And you can do manual adjustments as well. So you can adjust exposure, color temp, contrast, saturation, a whole bunch of stuff. The last thing I wanted to show you here, with this clip anyway, is the export, because the export settings are really important. You want to get those correct settings so you don't lose any quality. So the first thing you want to do is you want to click custom right here, and you want to export it in 4K. I highly recommend that. 4K is going to give you the best quality here. As far as frame rate, that's up to you. In this case, this clip was 5.7K 60. So in this case, I could keep it at 60 or I could go to the 30. It's not going to affect the speed if I do that. But if you did a clip in 30 frames per second, it's not going to offer you the 60 option. And the bitrate, I recommend doing at least 100 on here. But I usually just try to do the highest bitrate. It's going to give the best possible looking footage. And then up here, of course, at the top, make sure you select flat unless you want to export this as a 360 clip. Flat is going to give you that reframe clip. Then when you're done, all you have to do is click export, and it's going to export the clip. So I'm not going to let this finish exporting. I'm going to go back to the edit because I wanted to show you one more feature here if you click on edit. So Insta360 also has some options here like create a video, auto edit, and drafts. If you click on create a video, it of course is going to prompt you for different clips, and that's going to be more of a manual editing. You click next here, and it's going to put those clips on a timeline. So basically, you can put together multiple clips on here, and you can edit an entire project, which is very cool to be able to do that from your phone. And then finally, down here at the bottom, we have ShotLab and we have Flash Cut. So there's a whole bunch of options here to choose from. ShotLab is pretty cool. I oftentimes like the Sky Swap. Sky Swap can be very cool. So let's select this one for the Sky Swap. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back here and I'm going to get my clip in here. We're going to click next, and it's going to do analyzing, and then it's going to let us choose from several different skies. Now, I know which one I have in mind. I want to do that starry background. I want to do like a Milky Way sky while I'm riding my bike. So I'm going to choose from that when it comes up with that option. All right, so I'm going to pause this, and I'm going to click Galaxy. So I'm going to apply the Galaxy here, and I'm going to let that install, and it's going to generate the preview after selecting the background. And then it's going to swing around the way we configured it. You can see the starry sky up there. It's a very cool effect. And we can, of course, select the playback angle, which I want that angle right there. That's a very cool angle. All right. And then after we've selected that, let's say we want to change it to 9:16 to make it vertical. We can do that as well. And we can customize our angle. Then when we're done, we click the arrow up here to export. So finally, I'm going to show you how to use the Insta360 Studio on your computer. I'm going to go through the basic import, some of the edit functions, and then how to export your video properly to maintain the very best quality possible. So first of all, do make sure you're on the newest version of the Insta360 Studio. At current time of filming, that is version 5.1.0. So once you open the Studio, you want to first of all make sure you're in Media. And this is going to be where we're going to reframe our clips. Now, if you go into Project, this is a fairly new addition to the Insta360 Studio, but you can actually do a full edit in here. And I'm going to show you that briefly here at the end. But you can basically do a full edit of multiple clips. You can add text, you can add music, transitions, the whole works. And again, you can get this software for free at Insta360.com. There is no cost to download. So first thing we want to do here is we want to go to Open Files, and you'll want to navigate to wherever your Insta360 files are stored. And I'm going to do Control A. I'm going to import all of those here, and it's going to import those .insv files. And depending on how many clips you're importing, it could take a little bit, but I love it that in the X4, it's only one .insv file. It's not two like we had with the X3. That makes this whole workflow much easier and much faster. Once your clips are imported, you're going to see them all over here on the side. And whichever clip you want to select, you can just double click on it, and you're going to be able to do your reframing and your editing with that clip. I'm going to start with clip number 1 right up here. This is an 8K 30 frames per second clip. And if you feel like your resolution looks bad in here, don't worry about that. This is not actually displaying at full res in the editing software. This is actually a lower resolution to make it easier to edit. So it's not as hard on your computer, but when you do export, it will export in the full resolution, and it's going to look a lot better as long as you use the proper settings. All right, so let's look at some of the settings that you need to know here. So first of all, a good starting point is usually going up here to the upper right, and just make sure flow state stabilization and direction lock are turned on. You would not want to use it without the flow state stabilization and the direction lock. For the next options here, make sure lens stitching is normal, unless you had lens guards on. If you did have lens guards on, make sure to select the one here. If you have the standard lens guards that came with it, make sure to select that. Premium lens guard, if you had the invisible dive case, if you did underwater clips of that, make sure to select that. But in my case, I'm going to click normal. And for the body stitching, you would select normal here, unless you had the thermo grip cover on, in which case you would want to select that. And finally, with the stitching optimization, usually the defaults will do good here. But if you feel like your stitching looks a little bit weird, and it doesn't look quite right to you, I recommend selecting the AI stitching. You're really not going to notice much of a difference in most clips. I'm trying to find where my stitch line would have been here. You can see a little bit of a difference right there if I select AI. And then if I go to optical flow, you can see right along here by this tree, if I select AI, very slight difference. So usually I find they give similar results, but if in doubt, select AI, and it's probably going to look a little bit better for you in most scenarios. And then under this one right here, this is going to be different effects you can add later on. I don't recommend doing color plus or clarity plus, but I do recommend using the motion ND if you want to have that motion blur. Especially if you're doing something fast, it's going to look extra good. And we'll get into that a little bit later on. And then for the audio, you can do a voice focus or a noise reduction. So if it was a really windy day, or you had someone lawn mowing behind you, or if you're doing a lot of talking and you want your voice to sound even better, you'll want to select accordingly right here. And then this option is simply if you want a logo on your video, you can select that. I usually use none there. And the rest of this is just file information right here. So we're going to close out of that. And down here at the bottom, of course, you can hit play to look through your footage, and you can drag around, look around while it plays. It's pretty cool. And you can pause there. And then these right here, you can mark as trim start and trim end. So let's say you want your clip to start right here. You can put trim start, and it's going to get rid of everything before that part of the clip. And then if we want to do a keyframe, we can add a keyframe right here. So once you've added the keyframe, up here are your various field of view options. You can do crystal ball, you can do tiny planet, mega view, ultra wide, and dewarp. I don't usually recommend using dewarp or ultra wide because it does introduce a crop and your footage isn't going to look as good. I love the mega view because the mega view is pretty good at removing distortion. Like if you look at this tree right here, that tree is very straight. It doesn't have that leaning over look to it. So I love to use Mega View, and then I just drag this around for specifically how I want to frame it. So in this case, I want the frame to start off right there. And then once I've established my field of view and how I want it framed, you can hit play, or you can drag this along to wherever you want to add your next keyframe. And let's say I want to get about 10 seconds in. And by the time we get to 10 seconds in, let's say I want this to be facing back this way. That's where we can add another keyframe and select our framing for it. And now if we go back and play it, it's going to move the camera as I move along. So the framing is going to rotate around. It's going to do it smooth and even. And then wherever your keyframe is, it's just going to stop with any more motion until you changed again or add another keyframe. And if you want to make sure the transition is good between your two keyframes, click on the line here. And I recommend using the fade in and fade out. That's going to help prevent some of those robotic, jittery moves if you do that. So if we go back and play this again, when I do that, I find that the movements look the smoothest possible when I do that. And let's say we want to do a deep track here. Let's say I want to track my wife and one of my sons here. You click on deep track, and then you select your subjects, and you can click start tracking. And so when it's tracking them, it's going to zoom way in on that. And the deep tracking I've noticed is much better with the newer app versions and with the X4 than it was with the X3 and the older app versions. A lot of times with the X3 and the older app, it would lose my subject, but with this, the tracking is spot on and a lot better. So I won't track this all the way to the end, but we'll go back and play it here where it's tracking. So it's doing a good job of keeping them right there in the frame. And of course, if I want to remove this tracking, I can click once on it and I can click delete right here. And it's going to remove that. And then the other effect here, if you want to do a time shift out of a normal video clip, you can do that, which is very cool. You just click ahead to what part of it you want time shift, and then you can click play, and it's going to show you the time shift, and you can, of course, adjust the speed. So in this case, I would want to speed that way up. I would want to do like 16 times. Now when we take a look at it, there, I like that. And let's say we decide we wanted to make this part of it a time shift as well. We can click there, and you can drag around, and let's just make the whole clip a time shift. So I'm going to go here to 16x, and we're going to play it. So we have our spin around in there as well. And of course, we would want to fine tune that a little bit, but Motion ND does come on by default if you're doing a time shift for the video clip. So anyway, once you have finished your clip and you want to export, what you can do is you can go down here and you can click Start Export with this arrow. And what you want to do is you want to select Export Reframed Video, and then you want to choose where you want it to go to for the file path. If for some reason you do want to export a full 360-degree video, you would select that. But in this case, we want to export the reframed. And for the bitrate, this is really important. You want to select 100 here to get the very best quality. Now you, of course, can go all the way up to 200, but 100 to 200, there's not really a quality difference in those. I've tried both, and the final output essentially looks the same. For the resolution, you want to do 3840 by 2160. That is full 4K resolution, and that's going to give you the very best results. For the encoding format, you've got two options that I recommend. The first is H.265, and if you notice, the file size down here is about 380 megabytes, which is not bad. That's a very reasonable size. But if you want to get the very, very best quality footage, and if you're going to do flat and grade it later on, like I am with this clip, I recommend doing the ProRes 422. That is going to be the very highest quality. But if you watch when I select this, the file size is going to go up dramatically. When I select that 380 megabyte file goes to 2.21 gigabytes in size. So do keep that in mind, that ProRes 422 is going to be much larger when you're exporting that to edit in another program. But if you don't want to have that big of a file, if you do H.265, perfectly fine. And another note, when you select ProRes 422, the bitrate option is going to disappear. And that's because ProRes 422 is essentially a raw file that's going to have the very highest default bitrate. And one other thing you can do up here, once you've set your parameters here, if you have those parameters you want to use each and every time, go up here to save, and you can select a parameter name. So you could say my default, something like that, and click save. And then anytime you go to export clips, you can just select that right there, and it's going to apply all of your settings down here. And then you can click export, and it's going to add it to the export queue, and it's going to start exporting. Now, the nice thing, once you start the export, you don't have to wait for it. You can go back here, and you can click on your files, and you can start editing the next one. So you can start reframing it. You can do your thing here. And in this case, I want to deep track that sign right there, because I'd like to kind of do a rotation around it. And eventually it, of course, is going to disappear, and it's going to stop deep tracking that. But until it does disappear, which it's staying for a very long time, actually. Yeah, like I said earlier, deep tracking has come a long way. I'm going to click stop tracking though right now, and I'm going to click play. Yeah, very impressive. So under the project tab, what it'll do is it will by default put in all of your clips here. So if you want to, you can go here and click on the plus sign and start a new project. I'm just going to call it new. You can choose your ratio for your timeline. So if you want to do everything vertical, you could do 9:16, 16:9, and there's a couple other options. And in this case, my timeline default is going to be frame rate of 30 frames per second. And if you want a proxy, this would be if you're using an older device or a lower spec device, you can do a proxy. And what that means is the Insta360 Studio is going to automatically give you a file to view and edit. It's going to be a lower res version of your file. But when you go to export, you can still export in the 4K. So if you're having performance problems, you can definitely do the 480 or the 720p. I'm going to stick with no proxy. I'm going to click confirm. So what you can do here is you can just drag and drop clips on your timeline, and you can just put them together here. If you want to, shrink the clip, make it smaller, you can do that. And it even shows the effects you applied from the media portion of this. So in this case, it shows the effect right there where I have it rotate around with the deep track. That shows on the timeline as well. And you can even take clips that you have not yet framed in the other one, and you can drop them on here. And when you do that, it's going to have a default here, and you can actually reframe them right up here. So if you want to use the Insta360 Studio for reframing, you can do it all right here in one place, and you don't even have to mess with the media tab. So that is pretty cool. I think this portion of the Insta360 Studio is probably going to be one of the portions that gets a lot of attention. Right now, I think it's kind of flying under the radar and a little bit underrated, because when you can do everything right here in one place, that's incredible. And up here, of course, is the same options I already showed you. Under image, again, same options. And I still recommend all of the same settings here. And then audio, same options. So basically, with your project down here, you've got a couple options on your timeline. I like to keep these at the default. I think these work great. And this is really beginner friendly. So if you're new to video editing, this is super easy right here to do. And then down here at the bottom, you've got your music portion. And to get to that, you just click on music. And there are a ton of different music options here. Insta360 has a big library. So you can just choose from a bunch of different songs. And then for text, if you want to add any text, there is a massive text library. So if you have a certain type of label you want to put on there, just click on the plus sign. It's going to add it right there. You click in your text and you can change it right up here. You can change that right there. Easy enough to do. And you can move your text around on here. You can make it larger, smaller. Say you want to have it down there. You, of course, can drag your text longer. If you want it to stay around longer, you can have it right there. And it's going to stay there. And then transitions, if you want to do any transition effects, there's a ton of those as well, which is very cool. Like, let's say you want to do zoom cut, you can download it and then just drag the effect right down here between these two clips. And when I click play, it's going to do a nice little zoom cut right there. And with the effects, if you want them to happen slower or faster, you can drag them out to a certain distance. You can only go so wide with the effects, of course, because otherwise they wouldn't be effects anymore if you made them too long. If you click play there, that's the effect at its longest. There's so many possibilities with this. And the music track, if you want to add that to your timeline, what you're going to do is you're going to click the download arrow there. And then once you've downloaded it, you'll go to my downloads, you'll click plus, and you can add it to the timeline. And then you can just drag it around to wherever you want it. And if you want to zoom out on your timeline or zoom in, just use this over here. And you can adjust that to your preference. And then if you want to scroll along, just use the slider bar down here at the bottom. And if you want to enter full screen mode, you can do that right there. And you can take screenshots. There's a lot you can do in here. And then when it's time to export, you would again just go right up here to export. And you'd want to select your resolution, which I recommend 2160. That'll be 4K bitrate. For your final project, I do recommend exporting that at 100 megabits per second. And if you want to share this on YouTube, then I actually recommend exporting this as H.264. That is the most compatible file format for YouTube. But if you're going to edit this further in another program, or you have a different use case where it's not going to YouTube or social media, then you may want to select one of these options down here. And if you feel like your video may have a bit of noise or grain in it, you can try this option right here. I find it does work pretty well to remove some of that grain. So I love it that they have that option in here. Removing noise and grain in other programs, you can do it, but oftentimes it's an expensive plugin to use. So this is incredible for no-cost software. So if you'd like to learn more about the Insta360 X4, check out this video right here.